A few moments later. More moments later. A little longer than a few minutes later. A few minutes later. A few inches later. 12 seconds later.
Joking aside, it is not uncommon to say that Finn didn't live up to his potential. I've even made many videos on the subject. After The Force Awakens, there was so much intrigue with the character, but the subsequent films didn't seem to do the character justice for a lot of people. With the recent rumors about Finn's potential return to the franchise, I thought it would be appropriate to discuss what I think should happen with the future of the character. John Boyega has expressed his lack of interest in starring on Disney+, but people change. Maybe his boy Oscar Isaac, who is starring on Moon Knight, convinced John how awesome it is to star in your own series on Disney+. Also, after John came out and made those comments about his frustrations with his character, supposedly he had a good talk with Disney that was really productive towards the future of black representation in Disney. Now, this video isn't going to be me rewriting Finn's arc. There are plenty of people who have devoted countless hours to that topic. Today, I want to discuss the future of the character. What story could Finn be a part of that would do justice to his character? What could happen to Finn to make him finally live up to his potential? How can we make it so we aren't playing drinking games every time Finn yells Rey? Ladies, gentlemen, and stormtroopers, my name is the Goldman, and today we're going to talk about how to continue Finn's story. Before we talk about where to go with the character, I think it's important to look at the sequel trilogy itself to make sure certain mistakes aren't repeated again. When it comes to The Force Awakens, Finn's character was done perfectly. It established his backstory, he developed a good relationship with Rey, and he went through a meaningful arc of finding something to fight for, that something being Rey. I've heard this notion before that Finn should have gone with Rey to Ahch-To to train with Luke, because having both Finn and Rey as the lead Jedi would have been interesting. Could this have worked? Definitely, but I think doing this would have actually been a disservice to the character. If the only way to make a character important in Star Wars is to make them Force sensitive, then that would diminish the importance of a lot of other characters. Finn spent the whole Force Awakens with Rey. If he just continued his story with Rey again, then it would have made Finn's story too reliant on hers. Now that ended up happening anyway, but it could have been prevented more easily with the direction the story actually went. Now when it comes to The Last Jedi, I am actually more fond of his arc than most. Rian Johnson looked at Finn's story in The Force Awakens and said Finn may have committed himself to saving Rey, but he hasn't committed himself to saving the Resistance. I think him actually going through that arc in this movie was the right decision. Just the way the story went about it wasn't the best idea. But The Last Jedi gave Finn a purpose that didn't have to do with Rey, which is very important for his growth as a character. The Rise of Skywalker was where his character was completely fumbled. Finn in The Force Awakens was a 1B character. Rey was obviously the main character, but she was more of a 1A and Finn was a 1B. They were both the protagonists of that story. In The Rise of Skywalker, Finn was officially demoted to being a supporting character. Doing this subconsciously tells us that Finn isn't as important anymore, regardless of what his story is. In Duel of the Fates, the original Episode 9 before Colin Trevorrow was replaced with J.J. Abrams, Finn is still a protagonist, not a supporting character. There's a rule that I don't know if anyone has ever mentioned before that I call the self-reflection rule. If you want your character to be the main focus of a story or for them to go on a meaningful arc, then there needs to be a point in the story where the character is completely alone. When a person is by themselves, then you get to see their true personality and what they are thinking. Because I don't care who you are or who you are with, but you are never 100% yourself if you are with another person. In The Force Awakens, there are a lot of moments where Finn is by himself. These moments allow us to put ourselves in the shoes of the character and see him as the protagonist of his own story. The Last Jedi even gives Finn a few of these scenes where he is alone and he is reflecting. In the Rise of Skywalker, there is not a single scene where Finn is by himself pondering certain decisions or self-reflecting. Compare this to Rey in the Rise of Skywalker. We get plenty of scenes where Rey is by herself letting out all of her emotions. So that is one change that the future story will have to deal with. However, the biggest issue with his character, and this is no surprise to anyone, is that his whole story in the Rise of Skywalker is reliant on Rey. Finn is constantly concerned with Rey and is always trying to help her. Now, the last thing I want to do is speak for the black community, but I can't imagine it feels good seeing a black man so reliant on a white girl. Now, this doesn't mean that the two can't have a good relationship. The Force Awakens shows us that, but the Rise of Skywalker shows us the dangers of that too, when a certain character is too reliant on another character. By the last film, Finn's First Order backstory is mostly glossed over. Yeah, it's mentioned once in a scene with Janna, but besides that, it isn't too important to the story anymore. The thing that made Finn the most unique character in The Force Awakens was taken away from him. Now that I have addressed what I feel are the major problems with Finn, let's talk about the future. Even if this show didn't have to be about Finn, I still think Finn would make a great character to lead his own series. Of course, the biggest reason is because The Rise of Skywalker made Finn officially Force sensitive, the only saving grace for Finn in that movie. We can begin this series where Finn left off, having no training, or there could be a bit of a time jump where Finn does have some training and he's now a Padawan or more untrained Jedi. Throughout the series, we can see him progressively become a more trained Jedi. His challenges with the Force could be a plot point, but this leads us into the biggest question of the supposed series, and that is Rey's involvement. This is a tricky one. Rey is Finn's closest friend, and if Finn were to become a Jedi, then Rey would logically be the only person who can really train him. This was also somewhat set up in the LEGO Star Wars Holiday Special.
It's all right, Finn. I believe in you. Just concentrate.
Well, it's kind of hard with them, looking at.
Great movie, by the way. So I think it would be weird if they did a Finn series and Rey didn't show up at all. With that being said, Rey should have a very minimal role in this story. I'm talking about her only being in 1 or 2 episodes. As much as I love Rey, this series needs to give Finn something to focus on that has nothing to do with Rey. He spent 3 movies focusing on her. It's now time to focus on something else. So that would be my first rule, if you will. Give Rey a role, but one that is extremely minimal. The next story point I think this series must touch on is Finn's Stormtrooper past. The notion of a Stormtrooper turned Jedi is one of the most unique ideas in all of Star Wars. To completely throw that out the window would be criminal of Disney. When I watched the end of The Rise of Skywalker, to me it's left ambiguous as to what is the state of the First Order. Based on Finn's comment of people rising all over the galaxy, it may seem like the First Order would be gone, but I think that would be disappointing and frankly unrealistic. The First Order ruled the whole galaxy for a year, and you're telling me it was completely toppled just like that? I don't buy it. The First Order doesn't need to be a dominating threat like it was in the movies, but I think it should still be a threat to Finn. So rule number 2, keep the First Order relevant. The last story point this show should include, and I guess you could argue that this is the same thing as rule number 2, give Finn his Stormtrooper rebellion. This was something that the Duel of the Fates script touched on, and I think it would have been a brilliant continuation of the character from The Last Jedi. The Force Awakens was about Finn going from a coward to finding a purpose, that purpose being his relationship with Rey. The Last Jedi was about Finn going from fighting for a selfish purpose to fighting for a cause in the Resistance. Episode 9 should have been Finn going from fighting for a cause to fighting for a belief. What I mean by this is that in The Last Jedi, Finn commits himself to fighting the First Order because they are evil. It's fairly black and white to him. First Order bad, Resistance good. In episode 9, Finn could have went on a journey where he realizes that there are a lot of people in the First Order who are slaves to the system, and instead of doing anything he can to murder them simply because they are First Order, he risks his life to try and save them. He learns that war isn't simply black and white. As it currently stands, Finn doesn't learn anything in The Rise of Skywalker. He's just there to fight the First Order. I think it would be unfair of me to say that a Finn story should have these story points, but not provide an example of how these story points work. So I'm gonna spend the rest of the video proposing my own story for Finn that I think would be great. Just a fair warning, I guess, this will be very similar to the story of Duel of the Fates. Also, I'm aware that a series can go on for more than one season, but for the purpose of this video, I'm just gonna propose a story for one season. So let's begin. The show begins and our standard crew of Rey, Finn, Poe, Chewbacca, Rose, and BB-8 are on a mission. Their mission is simple: infiltrate a First Order base and destroy it. The galaxy, although united against Palpatine's forces, isn't entirely united against the First Order anymore. The First Order has largely had to retreat to just a few systems, one of those systems being Coruscant, but their grasp on those systems is hard. Many in the galaxy suggest that they just let the First Order be, since they are no threat to the other thousands of systems in the galaxy. We learn that in this post-Rise of Skywalker era, the galaxy at large is tired of a galactic government. Systems want to rule themselves individually, preventing another republic from collapsing because the previous two did. While the Resistance has certainly grown since the Rise of Skywalker, they don't have the resources or support to attempt a large-scale invasion of Coruscant, so they try to gather resources elsewhere, and that is what the mission in the beginning is for. There's this elaborate plan, and each person of our main crew has an integral role to play in order for the plan to work. Very similar to the opening of Return of the Jedi. After just sneaking around or whatnot, things go wrong and Rey takes out her lightsaber and wrecks house. For the sake of me being a fan of the character, we can give her her own hallway scene like Luke and Vader. Finn also arrives and he now also has a lightsaber and he is killing stormtroopers as well. Not as skillfully as Rey, I might add. A bunch of stormtroopers escape and Finn won't let them because they are First Order. They are the enemy. However, just as one stormtrooper is about to escape, the soldier takes off his helmet and it's a person Finn recognizes. We can get a flashback to Finn when he was with the First Order, and we learn that these two were squad mates or something. However, before the stormtrooper can escape, Poe, Rey, or one of the other members of the crew killed the stormtrooper. Before the stormtrooper dies, he or she tells Finn that the rest of their squad is still alive, and tells Finn to save them on Coruscant. Our gang leaves and manages to steal a Star Destroyer, and they destroy the base with the mission being a complete success. Back at the base or whatever, Finn is clearly bothered by the events of what happened. He is alone and reflecting on the fact that one of his former friends who was just like him was killed. He chats with Rey and expresses his pain he is feeling about all the stormtroopers that were not as lucky as he was to defect. Meanwhile, because of the new Star Destroyer, the Resistance feels they now have the resources to take back Coruscant and liberate the people there. Rey mentions that there is a beacon under the Jedi Temple that would call all the systems still under the First Order rule to war and likely lead a rebellion. Finn and Jannah volunteer to go to Coruscant to try and activate the beacon. Finn asks Jannah because he knows she's the only other person who is part of the First Order. Finn doesn't want to go simply to activate the beacon though. He also wants to find his former friends and save them. Finn and Jannah arrive on Coruscant and they see the horrors that's going on there. Kids are being ripped away from their parents to serve the First Order, and people are starving in the street. Meanwhile, they manage to sneak their way into an underground city. There are thousands of people all hiding from the First Order, but they are too scared to fight. Finn introduces himself as a Jedi from the Resistance. They all know what a Jedi is from the legends, but they have no clue what the Resistance is, because the First Order has blocked off all communication outside the planet. Finn tells them that there's a plan to save the planet, but he needs to activate the beacon under the Jedi Temple. They succeed after a long mission or whatever, and the beacon is activated. Finn sends out a message saying how the First Order rules by fear, but they are the ones who are scared. The time to rise is now. The Resistance arrives, but no one else comes to help. None of the other citizens trapped in any of the other systems help. The Resistance loses a lot of forces, and they are forced to retreat while Finn and Jannah are still on Coruscant. While there, Finn runs into an injured stormtrooper and he helps him. The stormtrooper expresses horror towards the infamous First Order traitor turned Resistance Jedi. Finn chats with the stormtrooper and learns that the stormtrooper feels lost because he is forced to fight with the First Order. Finn asks what his number is and he says FN something 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 something. Finn gives him a new name and tells him he needs to fight for a cause he believes in, not what other people believe in. This would repeat the lessons of Poe giving Finn a name and Rose teaching Finn to fight for a cause larger than himself. Finn asks where his former squad is, and the soldier tells him that they are all dead, having been defeated in a different battle. Other stormtroopers arrive and take Finn and Jannah prisoner. The First Order plans on giving Finn a public execution. Finn feels defeated, but as the public execution is about to commence, the stormtrooper he talked to before saves him, along with other stormtroopers who decided to defect as well. well. But along with the stormtroopers who were defecting, the people from the underground city decided to lead the revolution against the First Order. They all heard Finn's message from before and decide to fight with him since he fought for them. A bunch of stormtroopers take off their helmets, revealing diverse faces, and after a grueling battle, they are able to overthrow the First Order and take back Coruscant. The reason this is so thematically relevant is because Finn went from traitor to deserter to revolutionary leader. He didn't fight what he hated, but he saved what he loved. Of course, I left out a lot of story points. There is no villain in my story, and I'm sure that could have been woven in somewhere. While I could sit here and propose a really detailed story about Finn's show, I think that this outline lays the foundation for something that could be really powerful. And yes, the story is very similar to Duel of the Fates, but that is because I love Finn's journey in that story and I want them to retell it in some way. Before I conclude this video, I want to talk about the importance of what continuing Finn's story would mean. A lot of people don't like the sequel trilogy, and that's fine, but you would be naive to think that in 2005, the prequels were less hated than the sequels are now. People absolutely hated the prequels up until 2015. I know this because I remember. I bet if you asked people back in 2005 if they'd rather have a high-budget animated series set after the Return of the Jedi with Luke, Han, and Leia, or during the Clone Wars with Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Anakin's Padawan, I think most people would choose the former. However, this is not what Lucas wanted to do. Lucas didn't listen to the people that hated his product. Instead of trying to satisfy the prequel haters, he devoted his time to help flesh out the prequel era to those who loved it. And if you look back at the early 2000s, there was a plethora of prequel era content. While there were books and comics, there were also a crap ton of video games and 2 television shows. And these weren't bad games or shows either. The Clone Wars is regarded as one of the best animated shows ever, and there are plenty of excellent Clone Wars era video games. So what this did was flesh out the era for those kids. Lucas didn't abandon the prequels after they were done. He gave more to its fans. So now 15 years later, or I guess 16 years later, all of those people, kids and adults, have fond memories of that era. So while most people acknowledge that at least episode 1 and 2 were pretty poor films, their love for the era is stronger than ever. And you know what happened? The Clone Wars gave us great characters like Ahsoka and Rex and Bo-Katan, and because the Clone Wars was so popular, we got another show like Rebels, which gave us even more great characters like Ezra, Sabine, Kanan, and Hera, and now both those shows are inspiring the Mandoverse. Had George Lucas ignored the prequels after they were so hated, we probably would have never gotten The Mandalorian. So what can the sequels learn from this? They seem to be in the same position that the prequels were in back in 2005. Well, it's really simple actually. Don't abandon the sequel era. I say double down on these characters and this conflict. What Lucasfilm needs to realize is that catering to those who at any opportunity will criticize your product is not gonna go well. Most of this passionate rage online is from people who will never give the sequel era a fair chance again, so why not satisfy those who love the era? However, this leads into my concern. Right now, the sequel era pretty much has no content. Fortunately, it's only been about 2 years since the trilogy ended. Lucasfilm has plenty of time to still flesh out the era. A Finn show could lay the foundation for other stories to be told. Also, the Star Wars universe is so vast. Exploring new eras can do wonders for keeping the franchise fresh and new. So that is why Finn's story should continue and how I would continue his story. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to unite the Claude Squad, and I will see you guys next time.